Hey, it's Lee Henkin here from Hyper Prospecting. Thank you for taking the time to check out this video training, which is specifically on cold email personalization strategy for your outbound sales prospecting. Okay, so let's just dive straight into the meat and bones of it. So pretty much with cold email in general, personalization is going to play a pretty big role kind of in the results you can get and your kind of long-term ability to really produce, an outbound sales prospecting system utilizing cold email that actually generates, a consistent and predictable flow of new sales opportunities. Now, there's a lot of different layers and kind of elements and sort of tactics when it comes to personalization. I'm not going to cover that specifically in this video. I'll do that in a different video. What I want to do in this video is, again, kind of cover the principles and the high-level overview for cold email personalization strategies, okay? And I honestly haven't come across a lot of people in the cold email or the outbound sales prospecting world that really cover this, the actual strategy side of it. Most people tend to really cover the tactical side of personalizing cold emails, which I will do in another video. But in this specific video, I want to look at the high-level overview behind the strategy kind of component of it, which I really haven't seen many other people covering. So hopefully this will be something new for you and something that's really going to get you thinking about personalization strategy in ways that you probably hadn't thought of before. That's my aim anyway. So when it comes to cold email personalization strategy and kind of working out what it should be, kind of whether it should be hyper personalized or as in like 100% personalized for every recipient, or whether it should just have layers of personalization in it. Really, the things you got to think about for this, okay, is the following four factors: target market size, deal complexity, deal size, and value proposition and differentiation. These are the four main factors that are really going to determine kind of the type of personalization strategy you actually run with, okay? So first off, target market size. So, there's some kind of thinking in the cold email world where it's just like everything has to be hyper-personalized, like, hyper-personalized first lines or hyper-personalized, emails and every touch point hyper-personalized. Now, the reality is that's not really true because there's no one-size-fits-all approach, okay? And one of the big factors that impacts this is going to be target market size, because you're typically going to get either large target markets or smaller, really narrow and specific ones, okay? So in general, right, the larger the target market size, the less you're going to really need to rely on hyper-targeted levels of personalization in your messaging. The reason why is because you can actually leverage the volume aspect of it while using sort of less hyper personalization and still get solid results, okay, without sort of having hyper personalization at every touch point in your messaging process or every message, okay? So that's a really important consideration. To give you some sort of examples, like if you've got a market size of 15,000 companies and prospects, like that's a pretty large target market size. Like you can send basically, you could reach out to 1,000 of those prospects a month or 2,000. And, in 1 year, it's going to take you basically a year or a little bit less than a year at that sort of volume of outreach to cover the entire spectrum of that market because it's large, okay? And then if you've got target market sizes of 40,000, or if you're even kind of global, where it's pretty much infinity, you really don't need to be going, not that you don't need to be, but it's an important factor to consider in whether you want to go hyper-personalized or not, okay, is that target market size, purely because the volume is at your disposal, All right, so you can kind of spend less time on hyper personalization when you've got a huge target market and volume in your favor. Whereas when you're looking at like very small specific markets, so to give you a practical example, a client that I'm working with at the moment, one of their kind of specific target markets is like the world's major global banks. And there's not a lot of them. I can't remember the numbers. There's maybe 50 odd or something like that, okay, in the world, like that we were looking at. And so when we actually build out our prospect list for this market, it only ended up being maybe 300-400 prospects or something like that. So in that kind of example where it's like very small, narrow and specific, you're going to have to look, it makes sense to look at kind of more highly targeted and hyper-personalized touch points and messaging for each prospect or company account you reach out to, okay, because it's very small. You can't leverage the volume, okay. So it's a really important factor to consider in terms of your overall personalization strategy is that target market size. So deal complexity. So this is another really important one. Okay, so I mean, the reality is for some different types of companies and target markets, and depending also on what you're selling, like the deals are just going to be more complex than others. So to give you some kind of practical examples with this, one of the things, just to give you an example, is like like an enterprise level company that has like, I don't know, we'll just say a company's got like 1,000 employees. They've got like all different departments. They've got decision makers in those departments. Then they kind of got their C-level, the CEO and the managing directors and all that who are kind of running the actual company. In those kind of companies, it's typically going to be a bit more complex getting the deal across the line because you have complex decision-making hierarchies involved. You've got people with various authority levels. Typically with those kind of companies, those really big companies, the sales process, it might be like literally a 3-month cycle. Like again, I've got a client now, and their sales cycle is like 3 to 6 months. And that's because the companies they work with are like really big companies, and it's just the way it typically is at really big companies. Like there's evaluation times, there's multiple stakeholders involved, and all this kind of stuff that's got to be done before the deal is signed off on by the executive decision maker, namely the CEO or the board, depending on even how big the company is. So some deals are really complex, and that's something that's really important to consider in kind of whether or not you want to deploy like a really hyper level of personalization in your touch points and your overall messaging, okay? Whereas if you're looking at kind of deal complexities where it's like just one decision maker, like a small business, I mean, it's a lot simpler to get the deal over the line because it's just like that one person typically you're going to be dealing with, okay? So really the complexity of the deal, which is largely going to be determined in many cases by the size of the companies themselves that you actually target for your campaigns, is going to play a big role in kind of whether you go sort of hyper-personalised or you spend less time on hyper-personalising each touch point and each message for each specific account or prospect, okay? Then we come over to deal size. There's a bit of an overlap between deal size and deal complexity. So sort of in general, the larger the deal size or contract value size, it's going to impact kind of how personalized you want to get with your messaging and your overall approach. So again, if you're dealing with like enterprise level companies, really big companies, and the deals are like, I don't know, $50,000 a month kind of deals, like that's a pretty large deal size. And it kind of makes sense really with that kind of deal size to spend a bit more time and resources into how you can kind of get a bit more hyper personalized for either each touch point or kind of each specific company, because there's going to be a significant amount of revenue you can generate as a result. So it's kind of like the revenue you can potentially generate if it's like a huge deal size. It should kind of correlate almost with the time and the resources you can put in, because you kind of only need literally, you might only need 1 or 2 deals per quarter. If you're selling something like $50,000 a month and you close 2 sales a quarter, well, that's $100,000 in 1 quarter. Okay, so in those kind of circumstances where you're selling to really big companies with a large deal size or brands, you really want to kind of look at taking a bit more of a hyper-personalized approach and how you can sort of utilize that. Okay. Oh yeah, and just to follow on with this, I thought we'd actually finished. To stick with the deal size, so for lower deal sizes, like if you're selling like a service that's $2,000 a month, and you've kind of got a large market size, it just doesn't have much sense to be hyper-personalized every touch point of your messaging for each prospect. Okay. Because with a lot of the companies where you're dealing with a smaller deal or contract value size, and you've got kind of a large target market, like pool of prospects, like thousands, you can just really effectively leverage volume and kind of ability to scale without spending as much time on hyper-personalizing every kind of aspect of your messaging and touch points in your prospecting process, okay? So, yeah, it's a really important factor to consider in the kind of strategy you go with. So, last one here, a really important one that I often don't come across from other people in this industry, is the value proposition and differentiation. So, what you offer and kind of how your market perceives it, whether it's different or the same or not, is also going to play a role in kind of your level of personalization. And this is, as I mentioned, this is not something I see a lot of people touch upon when it comes to cold email personalization strategy. But it's a really important thing to think about, because kind of how different your offer is perceived and the value prop, it does play a big role in whether or not you need to be hyper-personalized with all your touch points and your messaging for each account you reach out to. Like, to give you an example, if you're selling like a software, and there's literally no other software company on the planet that sells this specific type of software that solves this specific type of pain point, like, that essentially is your differentiation in your email. Because if you're reaching out to the right prospects for that specific offer, they're going to see like, oh, holy shit, there's nothing else on the market like this. That's going to stand out just on its own, the offer itself, the value proposition of that offer. Okay, so if it's something that not many other people have or do, like, you can really get away with kind of less hyper-personalization, because of that value proposition is so unique and just so different in that specific target market. Because you've got to understand, like, the whole point with hyper-personalization, really, in a nutshell, is just to make A, your emails stand out more compared to everyone else, and B, increase positive response rates. But in this kind of example I've just given you with the software and how it's, nothing else like it on the market, like, the value proposition of that software, like, that's doing all the differentiation for you, which is going to basically stand out itself because there's nothing else like it on the market. And it's going to should typically, if you write the message well and do your targeting well, a very high positive response rate, okay? However, another thing you want to consider with this is how saturated and competitive your market is. So this is really common in the marketing agency world, where, like, you might, how many SEO agencies, for example, are there on the planet? There's literally so many. If you're reaching out to all these kind of companies and prospects, at first glance, if that looks like the same kind of offer to them as the other 10 SEO companies that reached out to them, is probably just not going to stand out and get much attention or interest, okay? Because it's just not perceivably different enough. The value prop is nothing that they haven't heard before, okay? Kind of the the awareness stage of these kind of markets where it's competitive and saturated is just like, oh, we've heard this message a gazillion times before, so it just has less and less of an effect. And this is a really proven phenomenon. I highly recommend, if you want to understand this in like advanced depth with the psychology behind it, you read a book called Breakthrough Advertising by Eugene Schwartz. He has a chapter in the book that talks about this in saturated and competitive markets, how the awareness levels change over time when they've been exposed to the same kind of messages and offerings over and over again, and it becomes less and less effective. So in these kind of examples, right, it might make more sense to look at adding more in-depth layers of hyper-personalized targeting and messaging as part of your outreach, okay? So that's a really important thing to think about, okay? And you know, that could be in the form of like case studies, maybe hyper-personalized first lines. You know, it could be mentioning something that you noticed about them from their social profiles or something like that. What else could it be? Could be something you noticed about their marketing. Like, it's just, it could vary on a whole bunch of things. But the main thing is with it, if it's a really competitive and saturated market, it just might make sense for you to add in sort of more in-depth layers, but also then factoring in kind of deal size and complexity and things like that too, and target market size stuff that we've already previously gone through. So basically, they're really the four kind of main factors, and hopefully you can kind of see, like, you need to consider all four of them basically when it comes to your cold email personalization strategy, and kind of piece them all together like pieces of a puzzle to work out what's going to be best for you basically. And to kind of answer the question that you're probably wondering is like how personalized to go, you know, as I've already said, there's no one size fits all approach to this. There really isn't. I know some people like to preach, oh, you must always use customized first lines, blah, blah, blah. No, you don't. I've gotten great results with myself, in my own business, and so many other clients not even doing that. But I've also gotten great results doing customized first lines. The answer is it 100% depends on all those factors that I just covered. Okay, so that is the main thing. So anyone who tells you it's like it just has to be this way, like, they're probably full of shit and some guru who doesn't even really do much cold email themselves, okay? So that's kind of my thoughts on it. Couple things you might want to ask yourself to work this out as well, in addition to kind of those factors I've already covered, is how much time do you or your team have to personalize each touch point, or like kind of each message for each prospect that you're going to be reaching out to. So, I mean, if you're kind of in the position now where you're like a solo kind of business owner or agency owner, software owner, whatever, maybe you've got a fair bit more time on your hands to do this. But if you kind of got like a team of SDRs, BDRs or something, or you're an account executive that does a bit of prospecting, you might really find that you don't have as much time, okay? So I really do believe time is an important thing to consider in addition to those factors that we've already covered. And another thing you want to look at as well is like, what are your actual goals? Like, what are your targets? Like, you know, like how many meetings do you need? How many sales do you need to kind of hit your revenue goals? Do you need to sign up 2 clients, you know, this month at $4,000 each? Okay, then so how many meetings do you need? What's your sales close rate? So you kind of really want to be reverse engineering this and kind of thinking like, what's your actual goal in terms of sales or new clients to sign up? And then from there, work out, well, how many meetings do I actually need to actually book? It might be like you only need to book 10 meetings. It might be you only need to book 5. It might be you need to book 20. You know, it's really going to depend. And a lot of that, again, will also depend on those 4 factors I covered. Like, if you've got a huge deal size, if you're selling something that's like $30,000 a month, you don't need many deals per month. You really don't. And that means you don't need many meetings per month. Whereas if you're selling something that's like $1,500, you're probably going to need more meetings booked. And then also, again, it depends on exactly what your actual revenue goals are for each month, each quarter. So that's a really important thing to consider with personalisation as well, because that will play a role in this. Last but not least, what's your entire pool of prospects? Okay, I mean, we really kind of covered this in the first factor with target market size, but I think it's important to touch upon it again, because like if your pool of prospects is like, I don't know, 3,000, that's your entire target market size in the planet, let's say, and you reach out to 1,000 prospects a month, that means in 3 months, you've literally reached out to your entire market size, okay, at 1,000 prospects a month. So then here becomes the challenge, because it's like, well, okay, so in 3 months, I've just burnt through that entire list of 3,000 prospects at 1,000 prospects a month for my cold emails. So here's the sort of the challenge for you, or the predicament. It's like, do I then got to go and reach out to them again for like months 4, 5, and 6, which is probably going to piss them off because it wasn't that long ago you reached out? Or do I then need to look at other target markets? So this is kind of an important thing to think about, because the kind of entire pool of potential prospects and accounts is going to really play a big role in how kind of personalized you go. Like in that example, if your entire target market size is in the world is like 3,000 prospects, it would kind of make more sense to like do less outreaches to make it more hyper-personalized. So then that kind of cycle for reaching out to the entire pool becomes elongated. So for example, like 500 prospects a month and adding in more hyper-personalization and targeting. And then that way it's going to take you like 6 months to kind of finish through that entire pool of prospects. Or you can even make it 250. You can get even more hyper-personalized. So it's a really important question to consider, is what your entire pool of prospects is. So we've almost finished. Is the last point. Evaluating the success of your personalization strategy with cold email in general, and honestly just with any marketing or advertising. Data is the one thing. So really important to drop the ego and just let the data guide your decisions, what to do next, what to optimize, what to iterate. There's been cases where, I've written what I've thought is like amazing copy and amazing offer. I've packaged it like so irresistibly, and then it just hasn't worked as well as I've expected. Okay, and that's kind of where at that point, you kind of got to drop your ego a bit and just be like, well, okay, the data is clearly telling me that this isn't working as well as I anticipated. So now we've got to try something else and test something else and things like that. So, and when it comes to evaluating your personalization strategy, data and market feedback is really going to guide what to do and kind of guide your decision making in terms of your ability to kind of generate, consistent and predictable sales opportunities and sales meetings, okay, from your outbound cold email prospecting campaigns. So that's pretty much it. We've covered a fair bit. Hopefully that's given you a really sort of high-level overview and really made you think about personalisation in ways you've probably not thought about before. Like I said, I don't really see people cover the high-level overview of personalisation for cold email. It's always pretty much the tactical stuff. So I'm going to do that in another video, the tactical side of it, but I thought this would be really useful, because if you don't kind of understand the high-level overview of the strategy behind personalising cold emails, like the tactical stuff is never going to be as effective as it could be. So hopefully this will just make like the tactical stuff for you like even more effective when it comes to personalisation. So that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like more help with this, my expert help with this, then do feel free to book a one-on-one call or just reach out to me directly. So we have both one-on-one coaching and consulting programs available, plus we also have fully managed done for you cold email, lead gen and appointment setting service as well. We can kind of just discuss from there what's going to be the best fit and make most sense for you based on where you're currently at and what your goals are. So that's about it. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah, stay tuned for the next one.